This is a CEO review of Day 7, Contest Day 7 for the 2014 18-meter Nationals. This flight was recorded on June 19th, 2014. And let's start with the task. Task was a fairly aggressive task. It was changed to a Bravo late in the day. I can't remember what Alpha was. I think it was 4 hours on perhaps the same task. So they removed it or lowered it down to 3.5 hours because the conditions were weak and the sniffers were having a tough time getting away. So very aggressive task considering that. And also the start gate did not open until 14:30, 2:30 local. So a 3:30 task, the earliest on-time finish with a immediate start would be 6 p.m., which is fairly late in the day. You get the westerly sea breeze out into the desert, and you get obviously lower sun angles, so a weakening of the conditions. And also our final turn point was way back here at Hawthorne. You can see on the 2D with my pointer here. So that's a long way to go in weak conditions into the wind. Let's look at Dave Nadler's blog here for some notes on the weather. He expected it to be a little bit better than Day 6. There's a video for Day 6, of course, if you haven't watched it already. That was a weak day. Average winning speed was around 75 miles per hour. Today it's 83, so slightly better. It was blue. Predicted 5 to 6 knots at launch and 7 to 9 on task, but it did get weak early. It did get weak later in the task. And actually, there were some pretty big notables that didn't make it around today. John Cochran and Bravo Bravo, Pete Alexander, Tom Kelly, and a few people struggled. Even John Godfrey, the CD, landed out in a duo discus at Dayton today. So it was a challenging day, to say the least. And it definitely shook up the scores quite a bit. So looking at the scores, let's just go through the daily first. I won again at my second day in a row and had a 2-1-1 to end the contest. So I was really excited about that. But today was a day that I was incredibly excited about it because I felt like I had really grown in the mountain conditions. I was very comfortable. I led the group the majority of the day today and pushed really hard when I needed to and backed off the right amount when it made sense to be a little bit more cautious. So I was really charged up. Second for the day was Martin Grant, who flies out of Montague. Really nice guy, really enjoyed meeting him and flying with him, and he had his best task day of the week and moved up a little bit because of it. Third, again, no surprise, Doug Jacobs. I was able to beat him by a decent amount today, 5 miles per hour, which is rare, but it actually felt good because he is awful strong and has he literally has no weaknesses that I can see. And watching him and comparing his flights to my flights this week were stunning and a huge learning experience. He's extremely good, as is Gary Ittner and most of this group. So third, Doug Jacobs. Fourth, Ray Gimme, who kept coming on stronger and stronger as the week went on, and 2 weeks after this contest won the 15-meter Nationals. Bill Gawthorpe here, who finished 5th overall, actually won the open class at Montague at the same time. So fourth was Ray Gimme. 5th, Rick Walters, super strong local Minden trained pilot, and well-deserved second place, about 150, 60 points behind Doug Jacobs, so not very much. And 6th, Rick Andrebo for the day. 7th, Gary Ittner, just enough to hold me off in 4th place for 3rd. I ended up 20 points behind him. 8th, Dennis Lenikin. 9th, Sam Zimmerman, and 10th, Bill Gawthorpe. So the final standings for the contest: Doug Jacobs in 1st, Rick Walters, Gary Ittner. I was 4th, and Bill Gawthorne. And then 6th, 7th, and 8th, Grant Martin. John had a tough day and fell from 4th to 7th with an incomplete. And then Ray Gimme, Eric Nelson, which is a 15-meter glider, and he flies out of the East Coast, so that's pretty impressive. And then another 15-meter glider, and a local pilot, Rick Andribo, in 10th. And then you can see the rest of the group down here. So let's jump into the task. You can see depicted here in the 3D, here's the start cylinder, and then let's go over to the 2D here. The task is obviously the start cylinder here, 5-mile radius around 9.2, Tiger with a 10-mile radius, way up past air sailing and past Pyramid Lake into Flanagan with a 20-mile radius, and then looks like back down to Dayton. No, back down to Ranch, then over to Hawthorne, then back to Dayton, and then back into the finish. So let me just show that real quick if I haven't already. So here you can see the task: start, Tiger, Flanagan, Ranch, Hawthorne, Dayton. And strategically, the big challenge here is, obviously the backbone of this task is the pine nuts. A little bit on this ridge here leading up into Flanagan past air sailing. And the big challenge was we started at 2:30, so at about 5:30 we're coming down onto the pine nuts and need to leave the pine nuts. It's already getting weak, it's already getting probably windier in the afternoon as the mountain breeze comes in every day, and have to get all the way to Mount Grant in Hawthorne and get back over the pine nuts up to Dayton and back in. So that was quite a task. It was very challenging, to say the least. So let's jump in. Oh, let me stop it and start it again. Okay, so let me slow it down here just a bit. So I'm taking 2.3 knots off of tow and got down to, let me go back to the beginning of the thermal. Okay, so here I come up off on tow, and this was a really difficult day. The sniffers had really struggled to get up. We might have had to relight one or two of them. And just want to watch here. So I got off at 2018-55 AGL, and you could see Dave Nadler is even lower than I am. He's in higher terrain, but Eric Nelson found a climb right away. So it's still weak, and it's still spotty. It's also totally blue. So I find 2.3 knots and take it. That's got to be one of the weakest climbs I've taken off the start. And Dave is really struggling. I thought he was going to have to relight here. He was sort of my off-tow partner all week, so I was concerned about him. Although he does have that Antares with an electric motor, so I wasn't that worried. So Eric and I get up first and are trying to crank back into the pine nuts here. You can see Rick Walters was sniffing and is already up and looks pretty happy. So I'm climbing up through 10 here, and a 4.7 knot climb, so it's getting a little better the further back we get into the pine nuts. Let me zoom in on the 2D. So you can see the start cylinder here and the pine nuts. 7 Tango's the red. Let me just explain something really quick. I have the top 5 in terms of their traces here. Some of the traces weren't working, but you have 7 Tango Sean Fiddler, Martin Grant, Doug Jacobs, Ray Gimme, and Rick Walters, which is 1st through 5th on the daily score today. So running up and down the pine nuts, trying to find out how active it is and what to expect out of the start gate. And it doesn't look like I liked what I saw, so I'm retreating back into the foothills. And this was a real struggle. I'm back down below 10, 12,000 foot maximum start height. So 3.7, that's going to get me to 11. So we're all struggling to get to 12,000 here. So it's still weak. Are they still launching back there? It's getting close to 2:30, so 25 minutes away from the start here. It's looks like it's 1:08 right now on the time. So back to the pine nuts, looking to see if they're kicking off yet. And 2 knots. So now I'm trying further to the north on 4.7 knots. And I'm also quite a ways behind the spine, and a big group comes in and sees that. So we're finally finding some strength, 5 knots up to 12.7. And it's 21:20 here, so 10 minutes to the start. You can see Doug Jacobs and Eric Nelson working inside the start cylinder. Dave Nadler's back up, 4-3 Martin Grant, who's going to be 2nd for the day. Doug Jacobs will be 3rd. So I'm at 11.7, 11.8. It's almost 2:30, so the start gate is just about to open. And the start gate has just opened. So I got up to 12,000, and I think I'm just going to come out here and bump and start. So just a quick touch inside the start cylinder, nothing out the top, maybe leaving $500 or 500 feet on the table there, and off we go. And so it looks like Rick and Drebo and I were the first starters, and Rick got a little bit better start. He was a little higher. Kilo Tango looks like he's starting, and Doug Jacobs and 5 Echo have started a little later. So it's weak, and getting out of here clean, finding a good climb is going to be hugely important. And now we're going for the back side of the spine. And there we go. Good job, Rick. He marked me 6.5 knots. And you can see back here, 5 Echo and Eric Nelson and Doug Jacobs are sort of the next 2 starters. Gary Ittner, Papa 7 has just started, and a lot of other people are hanging back. So it's already 2:45 here, so these guys are looking at 6:15 finish times if they haven't started yet, or pretty close to 6:15. So starting early today was really, really critical. And Doug jets back well behind the spine here. So here's Rick and Drebo and 7 Tango, Sean Fiddler, Doug Jacobs, Gary Ittner, Eric Nelson, Tom Kelly. There's some of the, oops, sorry, I'm double clicking here on an Apple mouse. It's not working well. So that's the start, and you can see it here on the 2D. Looking ahead, here's the first turn, and the second turn is going to be, there's air sailing, so here's Pyramid Lake, and here's the, I'm not sure what this mountain is called, but this is where we're going after the first turn. It's totally blue, and it's just stay over the high ground and don't get stuck low. And a lot of people get stuck low today. This is the lowest, weakest conditions to the north that we had, and I think we went north 3 or 4 days. So Rick continues on. I find a good climb, 8.3 knots, but for some reason I only take it up 800 feet here. That was probably stupid considering the day. Only 2 turns. So Doug worked way farther to the east. And how's he doing? He's a little bit below. Doug is at 10, and with 1,000 foot of climb, I'm at 11.5. And you can sort of see there, vertically maybe 4 or 5 miles, and a mile behind Rick, or 2 miles behind Rick. So here we are coming into the to the first turn area. And Rick made his turn. Relatively low, I'm sure I saw that. And 4.2 knots for 561 feet, not very good. And just to look back here, Doug looks considerably lower. So Gary's higher, Doug is down to 9,000 feet. So this is a very, very weak day. And it looks like I turned at that thermal. So looking at this at first, and I have looked at this flight once before recording it, at first looking at the flight I thought, oh my gosh, I did not go far enough into the first turn again. But there's a valley out here, and I actually go, I think, the farthest that anybody went. Maybe one other guy goes out as far as I do, but nobody went too far. Everyone knows it's going to be weak. There's a lot of people struggling in low into this turn, and they want to get back up into the high ground. And if you went deep into this turn, you'd be below the peaks here and really boxed in. So what I'm really excited about is I'm out ahead again, flying on my own and flying fast, which I think is good. From a confidence perspective and all of that. So you can see not many people went in as far as I did there. 6.2 knots for 2,000, so that was a clear mark for everybody else. Yankee Charlie comes in right at my altitude, and Dennis Linekin and Rick Walters come in as well. Gary Ittner a little below there, and we move over and continue at 6.5 knots. So it was a 3,000 foot climb basically. And looks like Rick and Drebo left early, and Doug's still back there. So you can see everybody's following the conga line up the high ground here. I'll zoom out just a little bit. And you can see air sailing down here in the valley, and then this Flanagan turn point with a massive lake here. There's not a lot of wind today. 8 knots out of the west again, so it's the typical 10 knots out of the west. You can see Rick ahead and Kilo Tango ahead. Kilo Tango is really ripping at this point. And these are two 15-meter gliders. Those are two 27s, but they're local super expert pilots. So I buzz right through that. If they're leaving, it couldn't have been that good. Let's see, we're at 11,000 here. Working along the high ground. Pretty easy stuff, but it's weak. You can see that the climbs are few and far between, even over the high ground. There's not a lot of people turning back here. So 7 Tango, I'm down to 9,000 feet here. So just to give you a perspective, that's barely over the highest of the ground ahead, and with sink rate, I'm pretty much committed to the mountain here. I need a climb. Rick Walters has climbed up behind a little bit and looks like he's gained. And we found 6.3 knots here, or I found 6.3 knots, and Kilo Tango and Yankee Charlie jump on it, as does Rick with a big pull up. So I'm on the bottom of that group now. And a little move over for Yankee Charlie and 7 Tango and into 7 knots. So 3,000 and then another 2,000. So this is 5,000 feet of climbing almost. Yankee Charlie, Rick, and Drebo took off early. And we leave at 13.2. So let's take a look in front. Yankee Charlie left early. 7 Tango and 4 Bravo and Kilo Tango are together. Doug Jacobs is quite a ways back. Tom Kelly here in the middle, just behind the leaders. And Gary Ittner, Papa 7, is quite a ways below there. Let's open this up. We don't need all this room. Papa 7's down at 8,300, so he really got low. 5,000 feet below this group. So he's right down on the rocks. As is Dennis Linekin at 88. So they just haven't found their climb yet. And here you can see Flanagan. And here you can see we're just about to, well, we just entered the 20-mile radius. And I think I go about to the end of the high ground here, and don't go too much farther than that. So Rick and Drebo still the winner. He started first with me and is still ahead. And Rick's happy to follow there. Kilo Tango turned around early. So we're still pretty high, 12,000 feet. And there's where we turn. Not quite to the center. Rick goes a little farther. Another couple miles and turns. Tom Kelly, 4th in the group. Rick has already turned around, is back over the high ground. And Dennis Linekin and 5 Echo coming out into the turn. And there's Doug. About the same altitude for Doug. So I'm going to turn it around a little bit just to, well, here we can watch Doug on the 2D. There's Doug in the orange. So back up to the high ground. Gary Ittner's gotten back up. There's Martin Grant, who ends up 2nd for the day and does it later in the day, which I think is fundamentally more challenging. So here I was only down to 11, but I take 4 knots for 1,000 feet. That's pretty weak. At least I only took it for 1,000. It's about 4:50 right now in the afternoon, it looks like. And now it starts to get more difficult. So Rick is struggling to find a climb here. You can see 1 miss, 2 miss, 2.5 misses, 3 misses. He's trying to get up. Not sure what I'm deviating for here. Maybe birds. No, that's a good climb. 5.5 knots for 1,300 feet. And I think I'll get back up to about 12 here. Yep, 12,000. So let's stop and take a look back. Martin Grant's catching up a little bit. Doug's catching up a little bit on 4 Bravo, but they're a little lower here. 1,500 feet on Grant, and Doug's almost to my altitude. I'm not sure if he went quite as far into the first turn as I did. So there's the look ahead. Kilo Tango and Rick turned a little earlier than I did, and they're still leading out ahead. So here's 7 Tango here in the 2D. Here's the pack behind, and here's Rick and Drebo and Kilo Tango. So what's Rick climbing in? Rick's climbing in 3.8 knots for 3,000 feet here. He wants to get up before going out over the valley and high enough to get back onto the pine nuts. And I hit it in 5.2 knots, but I only take a couple turns. Usually that's not the smartest thing in the world to do, but let's see how it works out. And miss. Doug's slowly working his way back. He's almost caught me. He definitely started behind, so I call that even right now. I'm at 10, he's at 10, and he's within a couple miles behind. But he didn't go as far into the first turn, so maybe I'm still a little bit ahead. 4.1 knots for 2,400 feet. But Doug essentially catches up here. And let's see if he sticks around. Yep. And Gary Ittner as well. So Doug has, I'd say it's about even right now because he started behind, but I went a little farther into the first turn. So 4.1, Doug gets 5.2 out of this. And off we go. So Doug's now ahead after one missed turn by the group. And looking back to the north here, you can see Minden, the Pine Nuts, and Mount Grant, where we have to go to the final turn. We're hitting a ranch down here off the bottom of the Pine Nuts, then Grant, then back here to Dayton, and then to the finish. So there's a lot of work to do. And it looks like it's about 5:30 in the afternoon. 5:20. So 4 Bravo, Martin Grant and KT take a nice climb here. Let's see what they get. 3.5 knots, so not a super strong climb. And somehow I've caught back up to Doug. So here you got Doug, Sean Fiddler, and Gary Ittner, and Rick and Drebo, and Rick Walters. Doug is converging on me a little bit. Maybe I'm in better air. Right with me. I did not know that he was that close behind. That's great. Getting followed for a little bit by Doug Jacobs is pretty awesome. So here we are coming back onto the high ground. And this is interesting. So this is the lowest that I've ever committed back to the Pine Nuts. So 8,900 feet, and AGL, where are you? 1,700 feet, but I'm out over the valley there a little bit. AGL, 1,000 feet over the rocks here. So Doug takes a little turn there, and it's going to be a miss for Doug. Here's Gary Ittner, Rick and Drebo, and Rick Walters, and Martin Grant, the lead 6 here. So the hope here is that somewhere along this path we're going to find a climb. There we go, 7.1 knots for 2,100 feet. It was good to wait. See, everybody's still trying to center. Let's see, Doug gets 4.7 out of that climb, so a little bit better spot there for me. So I'm up to only 10,000 feet, still not high enough to be comfortable to go back out into the valley and down to Hawthorne. Doug found another climb there and got up to 11, so 1,100 feet above me. 4 threes back in it. Rick Walters is in second now. Martin Grant's in third. So now I'm cutting across from sort of the main spine of the pine nuts onto this southern portion of the pine nuts. And you can see here I'm right down on the rocks. There's not a lot in it, so I've got to commit to the windward face. And guys are reading between, well, it looks like about 20 knots out of the west right now. Some are reading 24 or so. But it's windy out of the west, so it's starting to wash out as it does normally every day. And let's look at the AGL there. So 600 feet above the rocks. Pretty damn low. And find a good one, 3,000 feet, 6 knots. So I should gain pretty good here on the group. But I know Doug shortly is going to fly right through my thermal at the same altitude, so it's hard to get away from. So Papa 7 and Doug Jacobs coming in here, and they get onto the face. So there's Doug at also 600 feet over the ground. Papa 7, 700 feet over the ground. And the rest of the group, Yankee Charlie, Rick Andrivo, Rick Walters, Martin Grant, Kilo Tango. So I get up to 12,000, and there, that must be what Doug, that's a miss for Doug. What in the world was that? It looked like he put his motor on. Oh, he's out ahead of me. That's just the optical illusion. Big pull up there, actually. He's gaining altitude. 2.4 knots. I turn it as well, and it's a miss for me. So Doug's going to catch up a little bit. So now it is a very exciting moment. Let me zoom down here. We've got a hit ranch, and let me zoom out so you can see what's remaining. You can see the whole group strung basically on the pine nuts now. It's late in the day. I don't know what, maybe this is 4:54. That probably makes sense. So we have another hour and 6 minutes left in the task, but we've got to get down to Hawthorne and all the way back to Dayton and then back to the finish. So there's still a lot of work to do. It's going to be late in the day, 6 to 6:15, or later if you started a lot later, or are just late on the day or the task. But this is a very difficult rest of the task from this point. This is usually sinky out here. You can go to this high ground, but it's not very high. It's not nearly as high as the pine nuts. And not rendering here. I know he had a problem with his trace, so there's probably a sync problem. Is 7 Victor Ray Gimme. Ray is with me at this point as well, sort of remembering that, and I know that I was thermaling with him out here. So here we are, just sort of searching for something along the exit to the pine nuts, and a miss, and Doug flies right through and keeps on trucking. Okay, so, well, that'll work. So Doug had a miss, and I'm going to take 4.5 knots, probably 60 to 70% of the strong climbs, or the average that we would be looking for. So we're settling for less here. Yankee Charlie's caught up, Rick and Drebo, Papa 7's caught up. This just hasn't been a stellar amount of speed here. And it's a pretty daunting look ahead. It's totally blue. I think there were a few wisps here to the right of course line, and I think Doug might have gone for those, but they were really high clouds and they were really flat and they didn't look great, but there were clouds. So we're going to get up to almost 12 here. Let's do a quick spot check on Doug. Doug's way out there. He's down to 10, and that was a miss. So I've got 1,800, well, a little bit more than that. Yeah, 1,800 feet on him. And there he takes 2.1 knots for 335, so he's struggling a little bit. And I take 5 knots for 1,700 here. So I'm getting quite a bit higher, but he's getting quite a ways ahead. And here comes Papa 7 and Yankee Charlie into my climb. The leader always marks. And Doug hit 2.7 and continued ahead. So he's still just above 10,000 and getting quite a ways ahead. So it's 5:10 in the afternoon right now, I would say. There it goes. Doug, 5.5 knots for 2,700 feet. So this is going to probably bring him to even. And if I remember correctly, he started a little behind me, but he didn't go as far into Flanagan. So let's see here. I get a miss, and Doug's just finishing his climb at 5.5 knots. So essentially even, other than a little bit more distance into one of the turns. So I reverse my turn. No, don't like that. So I remember being able to see Doug down there at this point, so I know from the time he flew through my thermal, I'm doing well, and I'm feeling good about that. Doug is at 11.9, I'm at 13.6, so I'm 1,700 feet above him. And I've got Mount Grant pretty easy here, but if I remember correctly, I still needed 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 feet to finish the task, plus to get over the terrain onto the pine nuts. Rick and Drebo just doing amazing here in a 15-meter glider. If there is any difference, he's certainly not worried about it. So Doug is pretty low. Doug is down to 11, I'm down to 12.5, so 1,500 feet or so. And Yankee Charlie, where are you? He's at 10.7, so he's a little bit below Doug. So here we are. I just crossed into Hawthorne, and I'm going to go right out for the high ground of Mount Grant, hoping for a magic thermal off the peak. And of course it's not there. Now Doug just touched and went, and I think now, I remember this, I think that this is Doug. And I think, wow, there's Doug Jacobs and somebody else really strong. I am going to go over there and climb on it. And this has been said, this face here on Mount Grant was sort of like a solar collector, and it was always supposed to have really strong thermals. And there's Martin Grant climbing at 7 knots, which is very strong for the day, and this late in the day, that's outstanding, and gets 4,000 feet. Rick and Drebo, no, not quite so good, 3.4 knots. But anyway, I thought that was Doug, so I come over to join him and get 7.5 knots for 3,000 feet. So this little bull here was working really, really well. I can give you a look at that right there. Well, obviously now I know that that's not Doug. But always loved flying with Martin. Flew with Martin quite a bit this week. You can see here Gary Ittner, Papa 7, and off we go. Looks like Martin's going to take a few more turns. Here comes Rick Walters. And now you can see the damage that's been done. It's 5:30, so we have about 6 o'clock. So we have 28 minutes until the finish time, the 3-hour, 30-minute finish time. Doug has not found a good climb in quite a while and is down to 10,000. I'm back here at 14.3, so I'm in a pretty good spot. I'm not sure if I needed another climb to get on here, but I'm figuring I can just fly slow and bump myself along. I might have dropped the MC down a little bit, but there is quite a bit of wind. We're seeing 8s, 20s, 17s. Let's take the average here and call it 15 out of the west. So there is some wind to work with, and the fear or thought of sink behind the pine nuts if you come in too low. Zoom out a little bit. Martin's left. Martin's at about the same altitude. So I gained a little bit probably by leaving early. So Papa 7, Rick and Drebo, Gary Ittner, Papa 7, Martin Grant 4-3 is going to end up second for the day, 7 Tango that's going to win the day, and Doug Jacobs is going to be third for the day. And Doug's down to 8,000 feet now. That's low. AGL, and he's only 2,500 feet above the ground there. And out in the valley, that is low. Let's take a look from his perspective here. There's no way. Well, you can see the climb that he's going to find now that I paused it. But interestingly, he probably gets it off of this little nub right here, kicks off the thermal, and that looks like it's exactly what he did. He got down low to this little low piece of terrain and ran it down until he found a climb. But right now at this particular point, he is 2,500 feet above the ground, and if you look at it from his perspective, there's what he got the climb on, but there's no way he's getting over these mountains. He needs a climb, and he's in a world of hurt if he doesn't find a climb. So that is a pretty impressive get. So here's Martin and I. Zoom over so we can see and play. Whoops. So I'm running the high ground, or what's left of the high ground, as is Martin. Doug is moving over, looking for his climb. I still need more, obviously. So 4.3 knots for 500 feet. And Doug just hit his climb, so let's see what he got. 7 knots for 5,000 feet. It's a miracle. That's a really big climb late in the day. That probably wins the prize. But he was down to, if this didn't work, he didn't have too many options there at all. So Martin's coming back to the high ground here. And what's he find? 3.9 knots for 1,100 feet. Here's Dave Nadler on his way down to Hawthorne, and Doug's in the middle of his climb. So Doug's at 11, I'm at 13.5, Doug's at 12. So all of that, I've only gained 1,500 feet or it's essentially even. I was pretty slow and conservative. He pushed hard and pushed ahead and found a climb when he needed it. So let me zoom in here just to give you a look. I think I'm plenty good. So my thought here at this time is, man, I could probably make it over the high point, but we really need to get up here into Dayton. You can see me right here on the 2D. Here's Doug coming off of his climb. But essentially I'm going to go through the saddle, get right down on the ridge. I think I was like 800 below at this point, but that was to some sort of random point on my UDI that's probably 25% in on Dayton. So I'm essentially close to final glide. I just need to bump up a little bit. See Doug's higher. Doug's at 12 and I'm at 11, so he's 1,000 feet higher. And where's Martin? Martin's back here in this area. So getting back onto the pine nuts, and you can see Pete 9.8. He's going to abandon. He's not going to make it from here. And it was that tough of a day. If we didn't make it when we did, it would have been very difficult. I mean, obviously there's still climbs out there, but there's also still enough weakness that you can get down to 8,000 feet. So here I am. I'm up on the spine, and I think I find a lot of bumps and zero sync here, and I'm working my way up. So I'm not very high above the ground, 1,500 feet or so. And here's Doug coming onto the ridge as well. And I think I need just a little bit more. And a miss. Doug pulling up through the same climb, but doesn't bite. And I'm happy to just tick it. And in the final glide the day before, there was sync before this high ground, but a ton of energy here. Here's the wind, everywhere from 16 to 9 to 22. So call it 15, maybe 20 miles per hour of wind out of the west, as there normally was every day. So 5,700 is the finish height. It looks like I've got about 10 miles to go here, and I'm at 8,300, so 3,000 above. So it's really not that big of a deal. And what I probably did is just cut short, rather than risking it and going out close to final glide and getting stuck in sync. I decided just to turn, and I'm just about right on time, so I'm pretty comfortable with it. And Doug is behind me, and it looks like he's just a little higher, 300 feet higher, and I'm a mile behind or so. Coming into the finish. Let's see, he's coming in from the northwest, or northeast, excuse me. And let's take a look back. So you can see Martin Grant coming on, Rick and Drebo's on the pine nuts, Rick Walters is coming back, and then Dennis Linekin, Dave Nadler, and Eric Nelson are going to make it around too. And Papa 7, Gary Ittner, makes it back as well. There's actually a couple curious things that he does. He must have gotten low and came way over to this end of the pine nuts to jump on them. He didn't cut over the mountains. And I'll show you something that he does late in the task as well. So here is 7 Tango, Sean Fiddler, and Doug Jacobs finishing. And I'm finishing a little high, and Doug's burning off his altitude a little bit better. And Charlie, Martin Grant, Rick Walters, and Papa 7. And I'll speed it up just a little bit here. I didn't quite understand this. So let me go to Papa 7 here. So everybody else looks like they pretty much just ticket and go in. Papa 7 is at 8,600 feet, so he should have enough to make final glide. He's 3,000 feet above and 10 to 15 miles out. And what he does, he goes in here a little bit and then turns around. He's probably just looking for another climb to increase his average speed or something. He runs down the pine nuts here a little bit, then decides to give up and comes in. And he's down to 74 there. So I'm not quite sure what that was about, but interesting to see what people are thinking. And also interesting here, Dennis looks like he came in pretty low through the saddle here, and Eric Nelson went on a very direct course. And Eric is 9,000, so that's a pretty low look. So he's got to get over these mountains somewhere to get back home. That's 1.8 knots. So he's really taking anything he can to just get up above these mountains. 2.1 or 2.9. So he's ticked into the turn, and he still needs more altitude to get back home. So he's continuing to work in the pine nuts. And then there he is back home. Anyway, so that was one of the coolest days. It wasn't full on 10 knot thermals, drive straight as fast as you can. There was some big decisions to be made. There was some damage. The task was probably overcalled. Some of the real good guys didn't make it, but just to review, so I got 83 miles per hour, almost 300 miles. Doug got 78 miles per hour, 275 miles. Second for the day was Grant Martin, who did a little bit better than Doug, barely better than Doug, 0.15 faster and just a few more miles, so 861 to 863 points. Fourth, Ray Gimme, always consistent. Ray Gimme was between Martin Grant and I in the last two legs, probably around Martin at the finish, and flew really well and outclimbed me in all the thermals that we were in together. It was just frustrating as hell. So I know there's still a lot to learn. Rick Walters, consistent as ever, fifth. No real mistakes and not a lot of risk. Sixth for the day, Rick and Drebo in that ASW 27. That's just absolutely amazing. Seventh for the day, Gary Ittner. Let's see, eighth for the day, Dennis Linnekin. That was a solid flight. Dennis started late and was out there over Hawthorne later in the day than I think just about anybody. So that's a pretty impressive thing. And then ninth, Sam Zimmerman. That's a solid flight. And 10th, Bill Gothorpe. And I think Bill, if I remember correctly, yeah, Bill finished an hour after everybody. And Bill was actually, when we were finishing and on the ground for a while, Bill was actually still out here over Hawthorne and found a way to make it in, taking little one-knot climbs. It probably would be worth looking at his trace really closely, but that was heroic what he did, and I remember sitting on the runway and looking at the spot tracker and seeing what was going on, but that was an incredible flight. So anyway, that's the top 10 for the day. Again, the winner for the 18-meter nationals, Doug Jacobs, by almost 200 points over Rick Walters. Pretty impressive, pretty difficult week. A lot of technical flying. Rick Walters second, really strong local ex-US team member, great coach, really good pilot. Gary Ittner, obviously a world team pilot, been to a number of worlds here recently and going to Poland here in a couple weeks for the United States. I was incredibly excited to be fourth, only 20 points behind Gary, and winning the last 2 days and a second the day before that. So I got over my concern about flying in the mountains and learned a ton and actually got pretty fast. So I'm super excited about this finish. Bill Gawthorpe, fifth overall. He goes on to win the open class in his JS1 with the 21 meter tips in Montague just after this. Grant Martin, sixth overall. Great pilot, flies out of Montague and getting kind of back into soaring. It was really fun flying with him. John Cochran, what can you say? Fantastic pilot. He just got stuck here today. Lost a bunch of points, but still seventh overall. Ray Gimme, really strong at the second half of this contest. I think he had one bad day. I can't remember specifically what it is, but Ray goes on to win the 15 meter nationals in Montague a couple weeks after this. Eric Nelson out of the East Coast, flying a Venice 2AX 15 meter and not a ton of mountain experience, so that's very impressive as well. Rick Andrebo, he had one bad day that knocked him down a little bit earlier in the week, but 10th in an ASW 27 is pretty impressive. And then the second half here, Dennis Linekin, Sam Zimmerman, who was in fourth or fifth most of the week and just had one bad day where he had to pop his engine out. Pete Alexander, U.S. World Team member, had a couple really good days and a couple bad days, but he's a great coach and a good guy to fly with. Had a lot of fun. Tim Wells, Tom Kelly, Steve Nichols in a JS1 as well. Dave Nadler, who flew great this week, but he had one day where he nicked some airspace and took a 1,000-point penalty. Tim Gardner and Kilo Tango, really fun flying with Tim. Actually saw a lot of him throughout the week. Brian Milner, who was my mentor there, he's a local pilot, really fun to fly with and really nice to talk to. Frank Painter, who had to leave the contest early, but is also a great mentor of mine and a super pilot. And then one guest who flew for the day. So that's the summary of the overall for the 18 meter nationals in the day. I hope you enjoyed it. I look forward to the next one. Thank you.